The word convention in IRS code 508C1A is literally the word within the specific clause at the center of the entire revenue code. And not only the code, but just this very reality that we live in. So in this video, I'm going to go over the definition of that word, particularly within the context of how it's used specifically in this clause, and then just talk more about the trust that's behind it and the reason why this is really the center of literally every single line in that entire fat 10,000 pages of statutes and codes. So the first thing is the word convention very simply means an agreement between parties. And then it goes on to elaborate and say, it's just a party is two or more parties. And it's typically some kind of contractual agreement, right? So the only question is, what type of contract are you creating? And that is where, when you look at the center of the matrix with the clause 508C1A, these are talking about a very select few entities that are not only nonprofits, but they're exempt from applying for that status. So think about what that even means. There's many nonprofits out there. Some of them are massive companies that, just span the entire globe. And out of all these nonprofits, to operate an entity domestically in the US, even most churches, they typically have to justify why they are defined as XYZ. Why are they defined as a church? Why are they defined as a nonprofit? And then they have to justify that to the IRS, and then the IRS gives their rubber stamp, and they're like, okay, you're doing business that makes you seem like you're a nonprofit, so now we're not going to tax your revenue. Now, ultimately, that's great. Some of these entities might pay zero taxes, but they're having to pull up their skirt, show everything, and then just pray that the IRS wants to leave them alone. So at any point, that can be revoked because these are statutory entities. The government or the IRS, they can just come in and say, oh, no, you're not doing it correctly. We're going to revoke this status. And now you have this big tax bill and all your assets are up for seizure. So it's a very truly insecure place to be in because a lot of these statutory agents, lawyers, and accountants, they eventually get to the nonprofit section of a code as the way of avoiding taxes, but they don't look at it in the sense of completely eliminating taxes. So running every single aspect of your life out of an entity like this, where you never generate a taxable event in the first place. And so ultimately, when we look at the word convention, the way it's actually worded in the clause, 508C1A, the whole category 508 is talking about a section of entities that have special rules with respect to nonprofits. So they're nonprofits, but they go by different rules. And even that is interesting. Why would you even do it that way? Why wouldn't you just have a separate category for different entities? I mean, the only thing I can think of, just logically as a normal person, is that you want to make it confusing. And that's clearly what it is, because as we go further and actually read this clause, it's very intentionally confusing the way that it's worded. So 508C1A, 508 is about entities that have these special rules, and at the very top of that, whole structure, it talks about entities that these entities have to apply. Every 501c3 has to apply for that status. But then it's saying, oh, except for this little part of the code where they don't. So then when we go to the actual line, 508C1A, it says churches, their integrated auxiliaries, and conventions or associations of churches. Okay, so let's unpack that. The first half of the clause is pretty self-explanatory. Churches, they're integrated auxiliaries. So it's either actually a church or something that's integrated with a church. So maybe like a building next to the church or something like that. That's a part of the church compound, let's say. So now you got to start, looking at how is a church defined. And that's also where it gets very complicated because the IRS has their own checklist of how they define a church. And this is where I haven't seen people trying to go the church route successful out there. Like I've seen people try and I've seen people do it in an insecure way. But still, these are statutory churches that I've seen. I haven't really seen ones that are technically free and have the ability to move in business in a flexible manner while still proving on a daily basis that they're a church. It's a weird thing because you're defining yourself as an entity that you have to stick by that definition, and then the statutory world has a way they can define that in a way where they can just draw you into their jurisdiction at any time. And that's what I've seen people go horribly wrong down this path. I've seen the SEC come after these fake 508 church entities. So ultimately, the first part of the clause is sort of is a mystery. There's many churches around us, but how do you actually do that in a way that is secure for you, yourself, your family, your assets? And you may or may not want to have like a congregation and all these churchy things. So that may not even be a path for you. So as churches, they're integrated auxiliaries, and then this is the last half of the clause that we're talking about. And conventions or associations of churches. Okay. So even how they combine those clauses was weird. They're using and conventions or associations of churches. So they're taking the word convention and association and they're sort of pairing it up in a clause. And they're saying they're both of a church. So you can qualify under this part of the code and be tax exempt without having to apply for it if you're a convention or an association of a church. So if I were to use these last two options and pick between them, I mean, what's an association of a church? Even that, the definition is going to be tricky. I'm sure the IRS probably has some way they would define association, but there's no like track record of these great associations, under the law throughout history. Like an association is a very loose word. I don't have the dictionary definition right in front of me, but it's just, a loose sort of conglomeration of people that are coming together to do something, from what I understand. And when you have it of a church, okay, it would be an ecclesiastical, that's the word, of a church. And it would be some kind of ecclesiastical association. But really, the first word before that precedes it would be a convention that is of a church, or a convention that is ecclesiastical in nature. And that is where we get to the one winner out of all of these. That's really very clear. When you look at the law, when you look at the long-standing track record of trust law and, private trusts that have been around for hundreds of years, even before the formation of this country, then you look at how this country was formed with a Declaration of Independence and an Articles of Confederation. And when you combine those two things, you have a trust. So this very country itself is a trust. So when you stack up all that evidence and you want to put yourself in the most secure position to operate in a free manner where you are a nonprofit that doesn't have to file to maintain that status under this part of the code, the word convention is critical for you because you want an ecclesiastical convention. And that is where the one that we use comes into play. So if you want to learn more about that, our community goes into this convention. It also has links, so you can check out the part, this part of the code for yourself. I'm not just pulling all these words out of my ass. Like, it's actually there. And so it's actually a mystery that, even the most competent people have their trouble wrapping their brain around. People ask me this question about convention all the time, because it is intentionally very confusing. It's thrown in there in the middle of a clause that's worded in an extremely weird way. Like, for anyone who wants to write English, that's a very weird way to word a clause. And then it's buried in a subsection of 501c3. So most nonprofits, the vast majority, don't operate this way. They just have to file every year to maintain that status. And that's what every public agent will tell you to do. They will tell you, oh yeah, you're a nonprofit, you got to file to show that what you did. But this is the one way that I've seen consistently, and I have a large sample size. I've seen hundreds of people actively that are doing this, and there's many more in my community that, I haven't even spoken to. But, you know, this is one of the largest pathways of people that are operating in a very transparent manner, and it works every single time as far as just creating this nonprofit and having it work for years seamlessly without having to file for that status. So I don't think it's even a competition when it comes to, should I create a 508 church or a convention or an association? because you see a lot of fake people floating around out there. Anyone who's watching this, they're probably seeing other things from 508 association people, 508 church people. I would encourage you to not go those ways because you're going to find heartache, you're going to find pain, you're going to find the IRS coming after you. Like, you're going to find a lot of bad outcomes in those directions. And on the surface, those may seem like probable directions because it's in the code itself. There's maybe fairly competent, seemingly competent people talking about it. But I'm not even if those ways could exist, if I had to stack up, like, what is the most clear, like, if I had to put all the cards in the deck in my favor, which way would I pick? And it would very clearly not be association. That one's an obvious loser. It may be a church because, yeah, separation of church and state, there are like certain things that, yeah, freedom of religion, that's true. But the question is, though, how do you define yourself as a church? And even in terms of normal definitions, you have a very high onerous bar to prove every single day that, oh, yeah, I really am a church. There's a lot you have to prove to be a church. Whereas a trust is self-evident in the way that it's written. That's the beauty of it. I don't have to prove something to be a trust. A trust is just is. And it's also very clearly defined. That's the other thing. We're not just any convention. Because, like, if we were some random business convention where we were an agreement between two parties, that wouldn't necessarily be that secure. Yeah, we have the right to contract protections under Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution, which is great. But it's not truly a convention, or sorry, a contract at that point that can protect assets. And that's where we get into trusts and trust law, where because you have three parties, and these first two parties, the grantor and the trustee, agree in a pact that they're protecting assets on behalf of a third party, that bond between those three parties is sacred. It's very sacred. It's the most sacred law in the books. That is why our country was created as such. They didn't create themselves as a church. They said specifically separation of church and state. So how did the state do it? They did it through a trust. And that is why we want to mimic them, to have the same power that they do, to have the exact same powers that they do. Even if we're one person, this is how you unlock a pathway of power in this reality where you're on the same level as an entire government. Pick any government in the world. Pick any massive, powerful entity in the world that's operating internationally quietly, they're using a trust. Like these large sovereign wealth funds and BlackRock and all these like huge companies, when they go and start doing things secretly, they're using trust. And yeah, in their case, they might be using it for bad purposes. And that's an interesting, question I get where people think that, because this is so easy to do, that somehow bad people will find it and then use it. But what's interesting is, a lot of most of the vast majority of people I see that find this frequency and even hear these words, they really are, their heart is seeking for a way to protect what they love in an honest fashion, and they also see the injustice and the way the system is so fucked. And so they're like, how can I do the opposite of that? And yeah, how can I, you know, follow God, but how can I do so in a way that's practical? And that is when people start even finding these words and seeing this path open up to them. And there's many demons along this path. And that's the thing with the word church and the word association. I've seen so much proof of the like horrible things that go on down those paths. Plenty of evidence of that. And again, you can join my community and see more. Many people will testify to how, oh, I was down this path that wasn't working well. That's why I tried to find something better, and here we are. So it's like, yeah, all these ways could exist, but what is the highest and best way? And what has the longest track record? And what also, where can you find a community of people that are doing it out in the open so others can learn and others can see what's going on? And Liberty Aid Academy, how I started my trust, they were doing that. And they were the best way that I could find in very dark and murky waters. Like, all these other waters are so murky around churches, associations, even trusts, it's murky. And it's like really hard to find reliable information that you can then see how other people are doing it. Because to be private means you don't have intermediaries. You take personal responsibility. And that's something that makes a lot of people very uncomfortable. They need to listen to their public agent. They need to listen to someone. But listen to your heart. Listen to, how God speaks to you through your own heart. And that's how you can find this path potentially. So The word convention is very important. It is confusing in the way it's used, but it's not confusing in the way it's defined. All it is an agreement between two or more parties, and how we're using it provably over hundreds and thousands of people that use this particular trust that we use. They're doing it as an ecclesiastical convention, and there's a very specific way we do that. And it's proven time and time again to work in a fashion that's not probabilistic. It doesn't work some of the time, it works every single time as it's written, because it's written to be secure and to be transparent and to follow the law. And the government does the same thing. And, anybody watching this also has the ability to do the same thing if they can get the right knowledge, into their hands and then exert that through not just the document, but through their actions that back that up. So I really encourage many people to walk this path who truly want independence and freedom. Like if you're not just saying that, if you really, really want it, it's not just saying it. It does take work behind it to enforce it. Because yeah, there's a lot of very free people I know, but they're also living under this looming threat of, yeah, in the way they operate, the large entities out there could come after them and attack them and fuck their shit up. So if you want to operate in a way where you can, create those boundaries that are super secure, that protect the elites, then this is definitely the way to do it. And it's the way that's proven, and it's around this one word, convention. And this is also why, because the United States itself does it, because so many elites do it, this is why the way this clause is will never change. The IRS is changing things every year. There's, new government agencies changing things every year, and all the slaves have to jump through the little hoops every year. Oh, this new little thing happened in this statutory way. Now, we can't ride off our G-Wagon anymore. Oh, boo-hoo, whatever. But this particular clause and this particular word will never change as long as we're alive in this reality. It can't change because it is the central wheel on which the entire system spins. And that's an important analogy because a wheel, the hub, the spoke of that wheel, you can't have multiple spokes to one wheel. There's only one spoke to the wheel, and that's around which everything spins. And I wouldn't, anyone who's looking at the IRC code, even public agents, I feel free to tell me what other clause could be the spoke of this wheel. Because it is a wheel, it is spinning, because we are in a game, and there is a center. And you could say, oh, it's random, and then there's just random things happening, and there is no center. But there is a center. That's how that's how the U.S. is created. That's how the U.S. operates. How are all those government buildings tax exempt? How are diplomats tax exempt? How are all these like shady, all the bullshit that goes on? How does that operate in a way that's just unnoticed? Because all these, not just the federal government, all the states, they're all subcorporations. They're all operating in clandestine ways that are secret and just, who knows? And it's because they're using trust too, very simply. That's just how they have to be doing it. And so they're definitely not jumping to the tune of what the accountants and what the little peon, statutory agents say. They're doing whatever the fuck they want. And so, yeah, to have that same kind of level of access and power, this is the path I've seen, the convention path. So I think I've gone on long enough on this. If you have any further questions, yeah, drop them in the comments. Really join the school community and drop them in the comments there, because that way we can have a much deeper discussion. A community member of mine, Cindy Lee, brought this up, so thank you, Cindy, for the great question. There's many other great conversations going on in there that I'm going to be elaborating on soon. So yeah, I hope to see many of you in there, and for the rest of you, good luck. Just I guess it's all random. You can just keep doing what the statutory agents say.